Don't you dare put that near me. The words exploded from Adrian Cole's mouth like venom. His voice, sharp and commanding, silenced the street corner in an instant. People froze mid-step, spoons paused halfway to mouths, and even the children stopped fidgeting. A poor woman stood in front of him, her hands trembling slightly, as she held out a steaming clay bowl of rice and vegetables. Her face was tired, lined with years of hard work, but her eyes were gentle, soft, almost pleading. "It's not poisoned," she said quietly, though her tone carried dignity. "It's just food. You look hungry." But Adrian scoffed, straightening his expensive suit as though her words were an insult to the very fabric. "Hungry? Do I look like someone who eats from a pot on the street? I would rather starve than lower myself to this." The silence that followed pressed heavily against every chest in earshot. The woman lowered the bowl slowly, her hand steady again, her expression unreadable. She did not argue. She did not beg him to reconsider. She simply turned away, setting the bowl back beside her stove and continuing to serve the line of people waiting. Children in ragged clothes, mothers clutching infants, old men with shaking hands, each one stepped forward, received food, and whispered thank yous that were almost prayers. But Adrian's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. For those watching, it wasn't just a man refusing a meal. It was a man refusing to see the humanity of the one offering it. And yet, beneath his polished exterior, Adrian's stomach betrayed him. It twisted and growled. He had been too consumed by meetings, too obsessed with negotiations and deals, to eat a proper meal that day. The hunger was there, gnawing at him, demanding attention. But pride is a louder master than hunger. Adrian turned toward his sleek black car, its windows gleaming under the dying light of evening. His driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, hesitated before opening the door. "Sir," he said carefully, "it's the only place serving food on this street. Perhaps one bowl wouldn't hurt." Adrian shot him a glare, cold and dismissive. "From there? Do you think I built my empire, my reputation, my name to be seen eating that?" The driver bowed his head slightly, but his lips pressed into a line. He didn't argue further. Adrian stood there a moment longer, glancing back at the stand. His gaze lingered on the poor woman. On the way, she bent low to serve a little boy who could barely reach the counter. The boy's clothes were torn, his face streaked with dust. But when she placed the bowl into his small hands, he smiled as though he had been given treasure. He dug into the food eagerly, joy spilling out of him with each bite. Something twisted in Adrian's chest. Not pity, not admiration, something he couldn't name. He shook it off, straightening his cufflinks, convincing himself it was nothing. But his eyes betrayed him. Again and again they drifted back to her. There was something unsettling about the way she moved. She wasn't frantic, wasn't bitter, wasn't broken by her circumstances. There was a grace in her patience, a strength in her silence, a dignity that clashed violently with his belief that poverty stripped people of worth. Finally, his stomach growled loud enough to embarrass him. He sighed sharply through his nose. "Fine," he muttered. "One bowl, just to stop the hunger." His driver blinked, surprised. "Shall I?" "Make sure it's clean," Adrian interrupted, his tone sharp as ever. The driver crossed the street and approached the woman. She was ladling rice into a bowl for an elderly man when he spoke. "Excuse me, ma'am. One bowl, please. For my boss." She looked up briefly, her eyes flicking to the shiny car across the street. Her face remained calm, unchanged. Without a word, she scooped rice and vegetables into a clay bowl, her hands steady, her movements deliberate, as though she were preparing something sacred. She handed the bowl to the driver with a simple nod. When the driver returned, Adrian eyed it skeptically. He sniffed it, frowning. "This is what they eat?" His voice dripped with disdain. "How do they survive like this?" Still, hunger gnawed at him, refusing to let him walk away. Slowly, reluctantly, he lifted the spoon, dipped it into the rice, and placed the first bite into his mouth. He froze. The taste was not extraordinary. It was not spiced with luxury or drenched in richness. It was simple, warm, honest. But with every chew, something inside him shifted. The food seemed to carry a memory, not of flavors, but of feelings. A strange comfort wrapped around him, and for a moment, he was not Adrian Cole, the billionaire. He was a child again, the sound of laughter in a kitchen, the warmth of a hand on his shoulder, the smell of home-cooked meals. For years he had drowned those memories in wealth, in power, in endless banquets and imported wines. Yet this one spoonful of peasant food carried something none of his feasts had ever given him. Kindness. He ate another bite, slower this time, then another. His frown softened, though he fought to keep his expression guarded. His driver noticed. "Sir," the driver said gently, "it's good, isn't it?" Adrian set the spoon down abruptly, as if caught in something shameful. He cleared his throat. "It's edible." His voice was stiff, but the truth echoed in his silence. He glanced back at the woman, still busy, still smiling faintly as she served the last of her pot to a group of children. She hadn't looked at him once since handing over the bowl. She didn't care who he was, didn't try to flatter him, didn't even wait for thanks. She simply kept giving. Adrian sat back in the leather seat of his car, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Something about her unsettled him deeply, the dignity, the calm, the quiet power in her humility. When the pot was empty, she wiped her hands, packed her things, and disappeared down a narrow alley as if she were nothing more than a shadow passing through. Adrian sat frozen, the empty bowl in his lap, the taste still lingering on his tongue. And though he would never admit it aloud, something inside him whispered, "This woman is more than she seems." The next morning, Adrian Cole sat in his penthouse office, 30 floors above the city. The glass walls stretched endlessly, framing the skyline as though the entire world belonged to him. But for the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel like a king. He sat at his polished mahogany desk, a steaming cup of imported coffee untouched before him. He lifted it half-heartedly and took a sip. Bitterness. He set it down immediately, frowning. It wasn't the coffee that had changed. It was him. Or rather, something inside him that had been disturbed. Adrian leaned back, fingers tapping the armrest of his chair. He hated that he kept thinking about it. About that clay bowl of rice and vegetables, about that woman. The taste wasn't remarkable, not in the way his private chefs could create, but it carried something he couldn't shake. Something he hadn't felt in years. It felt like home. He brushed the thought aside angrily, opening his laptop, diving into contracts, numbers, and endless negotiations. Yet every line blurred, every deal felt hollow. He found himself staring at the screen without reading a single word. His thoughts wandered, again and again, back to her. By noon, frustration boiled inside him. He slammed the laptop shut, startling his secretary. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he snapped. "Sir, you heard me. Cancel them." The secretary stammered. But Mr. Cole, the investors—" "Cancel them," Adrian barked. Then, softer, almost as though to himself, "I need to see something." Minutes later, his car was rolling down familiar streets, but this time he gave no instructions. His driver already knew where they were going. When the car stopped, Adrian stepped out himself. No crowd of assistants, no shield of arrogance, just him. The stand was the same, small, simple, plain, yet it glowed like a beacon against the dull gray of the street. The scent of warm food filled the air, comforting, steady. And there she was, the woman, standing by her pot, ladling food with the same calm patience as before. But something else lingered in the air, too. Whispers. People noticed him, pointing discreetly, murmuring his name. "Isn't that Adrian Cole? What's he doing here again?" Adrian ignored them, straightening his suit jacket, forcing his pride into place. He stepped closer this time, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. The woman looked up. Her gaze met his, steady, unflinching. Her face carried no surprise, no fear, no hunger for recognition, only calm. "Hungry again?" she asked simply. Her words disarmed him. They weren't mocking, weren't servile, just honest. Adrian cleared his throat, his voice stiff. I wanted to ask, why? Why do you do this? Stand here every evening giving food away when you have so little yourself? The woman handed a bowl to a young girl clutching a doll with missing buttons before she answered. Because hunger doesn't ask who you are, rich, poor, proud, humble. When your stomach aches, all you want is kindness, and I have enough to share. Adrian frowned, his brows furrowing. Enough? You live on scraps and yet you give them away? She finally looked at him fully. Her eyes, though tired, carried a quiet fire. Sometimes scraps in the right hands can mean survival. Sometimes one bowl can mean hope. Her words pierced deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth to argue but found nothing to say. He turned sharply, intending to leave, but paused. There was something in her voice, a softness, a cadence, something he knew, something that pulled at buried memories he thought were long dead. But he shook it off, convincing himself it was nothing. The next day he returned again. And the day after. Each time he told himself it was curiosity, that he wanted to understand, that he needed to prove something. But each time he found himself standing there longer, eating more slowly, asking questions he had never cared about before. Don't you get tired? He asked one evening. Of what? She replied, ladling food without pause. Of serving, of giving, of carrying everyone else's burdens when you can barely carry your own. The woman smiled faintly, though sadness touched her eyes. When you've known what it feels like to go to bed hungry, you don't get tired of feeding others. Her words stuck to him long after he left. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian's visits became a quiet rhythm. He stopped denying it to himself. There was something about her, something that drew him back. He needed to know more. Finally, one evening, as the sun sank low and the street glowed orange, he asked the question that had been building inside him. What's your name? The woman hesitated. Her hands paused on the ladle. She looked at him, her gaze searching his face, as though deciding something. Then, softly, she said, Elena. The name struck him like thunder. His breath caught. His heart slammed against his ribs. Elena. He repeated it, voice trembling. Elena Moreno? Her eyes flickered. Just for a second, recognition passed through them, but she masked it quickly, lowering her gaze. Names don't matter here, sir, only the food. But it was too late. The world tilted. Adrian staggered back, memories crashing over him. Elena Moreno. She wasn't just any woman. She was his Elena. The woman who had worked in his family's mansion when he was a child. The maid who had raised him when his parents were too busy climbing ladders of wealth and reputation. The woman who had held him when he cried after nightmares, who had tied his shoelaces, who had cooked him warm meals when his parents forgot he hadn't eaten. Elena? His voice cracked, guilt tightening around his throat. All these years. I thought you disappeared. Elena smiled faintly, her face lined with both kindness and sorrow. I didn't disappear, Adrian. I was dismissed. Cast aside. A maid doesn't belong in the world of the rich once she's no longer useful. Adrian's chest tightened painfully. The arrogance that had shielded him his whole life cracked open, leaving him raw. The woman he had mocked, the woman whose food he had refused, was the very woman who had once been his comfort, his warmth, the only person in his childhood who had ever made him feel seen. His driver, standing nearby, looked at him with wide eyes. Sir, is she... Adrian could only nod, his voice breaking. She was the only family I ever really had. And in that moment, standing on a crowded street with the smell of rice and vegetables in the air, the richest man in the city felt poorer than he had ever felt in his life. Adrian Cole didn't sleep that night. He lay in his penthouse bed surrounded by luxury, Silk sheets, marble floors, city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet for the first time in years, none of it brought him comfort. Instead, his mind was haunted by Elena's face, her hands ladling food for strangers, her voice calm and steady, saying, "A maid doesn't belong in the world of the rich once she's no longer useful." Those words cut deeper than any blade. He remembered being a boy, small and fragile in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. His parents had been present in name, but never in heart. Their time belonged to parties, deals, and appearances. Their love was reserved for status, not their son. But Elena had been there. She had tucked him into bed. She had taught him to smile when life felt lonely. She had made his birthdays special with nothing more than a cupcake and a candle she bought with her own money. And then, one day, she was gone. His parents had dismissed her when they no longer needed a maid. Adrian had been too young to understand, too scared to fight. He had buried the memory, replacing it with walls of arrogance, ambition, and wealth. Now, decades later, here she was, still giving, still loving, still carrying the same dignity he had once leaned on as a child. And he, the man who had everything, had insulted her, mocked her, rejected her. The next evening, Adrian returned to the street corner. He didn't arrive in his polished car this time. He walked. People stared in disbelief, murmuring, but he didn't care. When he reached the stand, Elena looked up. For the first time, he saw recognition soften her face fully. Not the recognition of a billionaire, but of a boy she had once held. "Adrian," she whispered. The sound of his name in her voice broke something inside him. His eyes burned. His throat tightened. He had built an empire, yet he felt like a child again, standing before the only person who had ever given him unconditional care. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry." She tilted her head, her hands still working the ladle. "For what?" "For everything. For not looking for you. For letting them send you away. For—" his voice cracked. "For being too proud to see you here." The street grew quiet. The people around them watched, sensing something sacred unfolding. Elena placed the ladle down gently. She stepped closer, her eyes kind. "You were just a boy, Adrian. It wasn't your fault." He shook his head. "But now I'm a man, and I mocked you. I said I'd rather starve than eat your food. His voice broke, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cole, the richest man in the city, wept openly on a crowded street. Elena reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, just as she had when he was small. "You waited in the end. That's what matters." He looked at her, confused. She smiled softly. "Life has a way of humbling us when we need it most. Your pride brought you here, but hunger let you taste what your heart was starving for. Kindness." Her words struck him like thunder. He dropped his gaze, shame flooding him. "Tell me what I can do, Elena. Anything. Let me give you a house, money, comfort. Let me repay you." But Elena shook her head gently. "I don't need riches, Adrian. I've seen where riches lead. I just need to keep feeding those who have no one else. That's enough for me." Adrian's hands trembled. For the first time, he realized that true wealth wasn't measured in money, but in the lives touched by kindness. And by that measure, Elena was richer than he had ever been. From that day forward, Adrian changed. Every evening he was there at Elena's side, not as a billionaire, not as a boss, but as a man trying to learn how to give. He traded his cufflinks for an apron, his pride for humility. At first, people laughed, thinking it a stunt. But when they saw him serve food with his own hands, when they saw him bow his head to thank those he once looked down upon, the laughter faded. Respect replaced it. Adrian Cole, the man who once refused to touch peasant food, now found his greatest joy in feeding others with Elena. And through her, he discovered something money had never given him: peace. One evening, as the stand grew quiet and the last child ran off with a full belly, Adrian sat beside Elena. The night air was cool, the stars faint above the city glow. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Elena," he whispered, "you didn't just feed me a bowl of rice, you gave me back my soul." She smiled, her eyes soft. "And now, Adrian, what will you feed the world? Because sometimes the greatest meals aren't those made with riches, but those made with love. And sometimes the people we dismiss as small, unimportant, or beneath us are the very ones holding the pieces of our broken hearts. Remember this: the sandwich your mother makes in a hurry, the tea a friend offers on a rough day, the meal a stranger shares when you're hungry. Those aren't just food, they're kindness. And kindness, no matter how small, can change a life. So the next time someone offers you something humble, don't turn away. Accept it. Taste it. You might discover that what you're really hungry for isn't food, but love." And that was the story of the rich man who refused the poor woman's food until he found out who she really was. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel Black Saga, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit the like button. And please, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, because sometimes one story can feed a soul.